Ashland, Oregon, 6:18 a.m. Outside the hospital window, the sky was slowly turning ashen gray. Wisps of clouds drifted quietly across the still autumn sky of the Pacific Northwest. In intensive care unit room 304, the soft beeping of a heart monitor blended with the steady rhythm of a ventilator. On the bed, William Hartley lay motionless, gaunt and wasted, his eyes closed, his skin pale and translucent. Only the faint flutter of his eyelids gave any sign of life when the spasms deep inside his body struck. A nurse, adjusting his IV line, let out a quiet sigh. The crisis last night had nearly taken him for good. His heart rate had dropped below 35. His entire body went cold, but somehow, in a fragile instant, he returned, as delicate and fleeting as morning dew clinging to a leaf. When Dr. Iris Patel entered the room, William was awake, or rather, as awake as the remaining parts of him could respond to the world. He glanced up. Those eyes, once bright with fire in a lecture hall, were now clouded by pain and tears. "He's trying to say something," the nurse whispered. "But he can't form words." Iris leaned in, her eyes meeting his. They had known each other for nearly 8 months, ever since his diagnosis. Bulbar onset ALS, the most unforgiving form of the disease. From a man who once delivered Shakespeare in a warm, resonant voice, William had, in just a few months, lost almost all ability to speak, and after last night, even swallowing was becoming impossible. Iris asked if he wanted to use the alphabet board to communicate. William blinked twice, a signal they had long agreed on. Then he turned his gaze to the board beside the bed. His arms could no longer move, but his eyes began tracing letters, one blink at a time. D-I-G... Iris paused. She didn't need him to finish to understand. Dignity? She sat in the chair by his bedside, silent, hands folded tightly in her lap, grasping something unseen. William continued. W-A-N-T-O-U-T. Iris closed her eyes. It wasn't the first time she'd heard a patient ask for the right to die, but this time was different. This was William, the man who once called her the last poet in a white coat. The man who had once told her about the first play he wrote at 16. She opened her eyes. Not just the eyes of a doctor, but also the eyes of a daughter who had once lost her own father to the very same disease. "William," she began, her voice steady, yet each word carried a softness, a quiet tremble beneath the surface. "I understand. You said you want to leave with dignity, but I need you to know you never lost it, not once, not for a moment. Even here, confined to this bed, even as your body slowly surrendered its functions, you've remained one of the most inspiring men I've ever met." She paused. The morning light spilled across the wooden table, brushing softly against William's frail, bony hands. She continued, "William, I've never told this to any patient before, but today I want to, because I'm not just an ALS specialist. I'm the daughter of a man who once had this disease too." William looked at her, waiting. "My father, he was the strongest man I ever knew, worked in a lumber mill for 30 years, and not once did he complain. Then came the diagnosis, ALS. Within 3 months, he could no longer speak. 6 months later, he couldn't hold me in his arms anymore. He, too, once thought of choosing assisted dying. But after my brother came home from overseas and sat beside him, singing lullabies through tears, my father chose to stay with us until the very end. And when he passed, it was peaceful, natural." She turned to William again as though his eyes now reflected the face of her father. My father wrote one last line in his journal right before his hands could no longer move. It read, "I hope my 2 beloved children understand I did not die in pain. I only wished to return sooner to the place where I'm no longer a burden to anyone." William closed his eyes. His eyebrows trembled slightly. "But do you know something?" Iris leaned in, her voice low, almost breaking. "I didn't need him to go, to feel relief or be less burdened. I needed him to stay, even just for 1 more second. To see my father again." Iris gently placed her hand over his. "You have the right to choose how this ends. The law protects that. And if that's your decision, I'll be the one to sign the paperwork. No one has the right to judge you, but before you choose, let me ask you one thing, honestly." She paused. The air seemed to still. "If there were one thing left you'd like to do, just one, no matter how small, even if it's only to feel something one more time, what would it be?" William stared into the distance. His gaze drifted toward the window. Out there, sparrows were chirping softly. The first golden rays of morning sunlight touched the bare branches of a tree. And somewhere a memory stirred. Suddenly he began blinking, eyes slowly moving across the alphabet board. S, E, 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 M, I, L, Y. Iris gave a faint, sorrowful smile. "Your daughter." William blinked once. And in his eyes, a flicker of something unspoken, beyond language. Like a man standing at the very edge of life and death, suddenly realizing the one thing still tethering him to this world was not his failing body, but the heart of his 14-year-old daughter, who sat by his bedside every evening, playing the violin. Iris continued, "I've met her a few times. She always brings a notebook and a pencil. Her drawings carry such sadness. But one day, I saw her sketch you, not in this hospital bed, but standing at a lectern, holding a book of poetry." William closed his eyes. His shoulders trembled faintly. Iris touched the back of his fragile hand, gently, softly. "I'm not here to tell you whether to stay or go," Iris said softly. "I just believe, if there's someone who wants you to stay, it's her. Even if just for one more day, 1 hour, one moment long enough for her to say, 'I love you, Dad.' And for you, even if only with your eyes, to answer, 'I know.'" Silence settled over the room. Then William, for the first time since morning, slowly turned his head toward the alphabet board. He blinked. T, H, A, N, K, E, O, U. Iris gave a gentle nod and stood up. The door closed quietly behind her. Inside, a man who could no longer move still lived on. Not because his heart still beat, but because his eyes still knew how to love. 1 week later. Warm sunlight streamed into the quiet room of a house where William Hartley was spending his final days. The space was simple. A few old bookshelves, a photo of him and Emily at her elementary school graduation, and a strange new device resting before him, an eye-tracking communication system, just installed the day before. A gift from one of his former students, Logan White. William sat in a wheelchair, his body supported by soft cushions and a neck brace. His eyes, now the only part of him that could still follow his will, moved slowly across a virtual keyboard on the screen, linked to the tracking sensor. Across the camera lens, Logan White, former student, now a documentary filmmaker, was adjusting his gear. He looked at his old teacher, unable to suppress the ache in his chest, as if still struggling to accept reality. Logan had never been a good student. He had battled addiction, dropped out of school, even spent a few nights in jail. But once, in his final essay before being expelled, Mr. Hartley had scribbled a note in the margins. "You're not perfect, but there's something rare in you. Don't let it be swallowed by the darkness." That sentence had stayed with Logan his entire life. It had pulled him through the worst of storms. When he found out his teacher was ill, he came to visit, and from that visit an idea was born. To record one final interview with the man who had saved him. But it wasn't until today that Mr. Hartley had agreed. Logan sat down, drawing a deep breath. "Mr. Hartley," he began, steadying his voice, trying to keep the emotion from breaking through. "I know you don't have much strength left, but I want to do this, because I believe some stories need to be told, so others will know they're not alone. I believe you won't just live in my memory, but in the eyes of people who've never even met you." "Are you okay?" Logan asked, eyes never leaving the camera lens. On the monitor, the words appeared, typed by the subtle movements of William's eyes. "I'm ready." Logan smiled. "The camera's rolling. I'll ask each question one by one. You can answer as always, take your time. And if you get tired, I can stop at any moment." A second later, a new line blinked into existence. "Do you really think someone who's dying tires more easily than someone who's still alive?" Logan laughed, then fell silent. It was such a William answer, biting, sharp, and dry with humor. and that was exactly what made it hurt. "All right," Logan said, regaining composure. "First question. What was the first thing you thought when you got your ALS diagnosis?" William paused, then slowly, letter by letter, the sentence formed on screen. "When the results came in, the doctor tried to comfort me, said we should double-check, maybe I was just lucky and had AIDS instead of ALS." Logan sat still. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Because at least AIDS has treatment." The next line appeared soon after. "ALS only has time." Logan drew a deep breath. "What were you most afraid of then?" "Not dying. The slow dying. You once said illness is a supporting character in the play of life. Now, do you think it's the lead?" William looked off into the distance, then slowly blinked. "No. Still supporting? The lead is how we respond to it." "You've written hundreds of recommendation letters for your students," Logan said quietly. "If you had to write one for yourself now, what would it say?" William answered with 4 simple words. "I loved this life." Logan gave a faint nod. "You were a bringer of hope. You taught people how to live bravely. Was there ever a moment you felt like you betrayed your own teachings?" William didn't answer right away. His eyes stopped moving, resting in silence. Then at last the words appeared, brief but honest. "More than once." "For what reason?" "For signing the assisted dying request." Logan looked up slightly. "You really went through with it?" "I did." "Does anyone else know?" Emily found the form by accident. She didn't say a word, just quietly picked it up, then disappeared for the entire afternoon. Logan met his teacher's eyes, as if trying to touch a silent ache no words could name. William continued. "That evening, I waited for her. Eventually, she came in and sat at the old piano. She didn't ask questions. She didn't blame me. She just played Claire de Lune. And when the final note faded, she didn't turn around. She simply said, 'I know, Dad, but if you really want to go, please don't choose a moment when I'm not there.'" Logan lowered his gaze. "And you still kept the form?" "I was going to submit it. But then I spoke to Dr. Patel." "Dr. Iris?" "She told me about her father. He had ALS too, but he stayed, not to live longer, but to live more truthfully in his final days." Logan whispered, almost afraid to disturb the stillness. "And you changed your mind?" The next line appeared slowly, as if drawn from the last reserves of strength in his soul. "I didn't choose to live more time. I chose to stay, so I could love a little longer. My daughter still believes my presence is worth waiting for." The room fell into silence. Outside the window, sunlight spilled across the treetops. A soft breeze stirred Emily's sketchbook on the table, its pages fluttering like fragile wings. Logan took a deep breath, then reached toward the stop button on the camera. But before pressing it, he turned and asked, "One last question, sir. If you could send a message to someone standing at the crossroads between despair and love, what would you say?" William looked directly into the camera. His eyes dimmed, weakened, still held something burning within, like a faint flame flickering through a stormy night. The words appeared, clear and steady. "Sometimes, life doesn't reside in a body that moves, but in a heart that still feels. Silence, too, can be a way we listen to one another. But if you can, hold your loved ones close, kiss them, and tell them you love them. Every single day." Logan said nothing. He simply nodded slowly, then stopped the recording. 1 month later. The first winter winds had arrived, brushing against the pine trees outside the porch. The sky hung gray beneath a soft veil of fog, cold but not biting, as if nature itself was holding its breath, not daring to disturb something fragile. In the small room at the end of the hallway, William Hartley lay motionless. The wires, monitors, and oxygen machine had all been adjusted to their quietest settings, so as not to disturb the final rest of a man who had chosen to stay a little longer. Clara Hartley, a 40-year-old woman with short black hair, sat at his bedside. Her face still bore traces of youth, but deep shadows clung beneath her eyes. Some nurses called her Mr. Hartley's wife. Others, his ex-wife. But to William, Clara had never been part of the past. They had fallen in love in college. William had been a sharp-minded literature student. Clara, a medical student. They married when she was just 24. Emily was born 3 years later. Happiness seemed certain until the day Clara was diagnosed with a pituitary tumor. After surgery, hormonal imbalances triggered a severe depression. The once radiant woman became a shadow of herself, crying through the night, screaming without cause, and once, letting go of her daughter's hand in a supermarket and walking away without direction. She had divorced herself before she divorced William. "You and Emily don't deserve to witness this unraveling," she told him the day they signed the papers. "I love both of you deeply, and I need to go." William said nothing. He just held her tight. Years later, she slowly got better with therapy and time. And when she learned William had been diagnosed with ALS, Clara didn't hesitate to return and care for him, not out of guilt, but because some relationships are not defined by husband and wife, but by once loved. And there is a kind of love that only exists when ownership is no longer required. This morning, she sat beside him, holding his hand like she did every day. His hand could no longer move, but it still held warmth. Emily was at school. The nurse was preparing his medications, and Clara opened her laptop, watching the interview footage Logan had sent after editing the first cut. On screen, William sat by the eye-tracking device. He couldn't move, but he was still unmistakably himself, sharp, witty, and full of feeling. "Did you ever feel angry at yourself?" Logan's voice echoed from the video. William paused, and then the words appeared. "More than I ever felt angry at the disease." "For what?" "For signing the assisted dying request." Clara froze. She had never known this. She had never asked. As the video continued, William recounted the day Emily found the form, how she didn't cry, didn't question, simply sat at the piano and played, and how, when the final note faded, she said, "If you really want to go, please don't choose a moment when I'm not there." Logan's voice softened. "And you changed your mind?" "I didn't choose to extend my life. I chose to hold on to one moment, the moment my daughter still believed that my presence was worth waiting for." Clara gently placed her hand over her heart. A quiet ache washed over her, tender, almost like grace. For years, she had lived with the shame of once letting go, but now, the man lying silently beside her somehow had taught her that staying didn't always mean being physically present. Sometimes it meant being there at the right moment for the one who needed you most. The final question rang out from the laptop screen. "If you could send a message to someone standing between despair and love, what would you say?" William looked into the camera. His gaze in the video still held the same brightness it had the first time they met in the university library, and then one line after another began to appear on the screen. Clara quietly wiped away her tears. The screen faded to black. Outside, a soft misting rain had begun to fall. She turned to William and took his hand. She whispered, "I didn't know you ever thought about leaving, and I'm not even sure I have the right to say anything now, but thank you. Thank you for choosing to stay. Not for me, but for her, and for yourself." William didn't respond, but the eyes that had stayed closed all morning slowly, painfully fluttered open. Clara gasped. She leaned in close, eyes locking with his. "Can you hear me?" A pause. Then, William blinked. Once. Clara's heart clenched. She lifted his hand, pressing it gently to her cheek for the first time in many years. "I'm sorry if I ever left you alone, but I'm here now. Still here." William's eyes moved, slow, strained, but deliberate. And then, using the eye-tracking device at his bedside, not to answer a question, but simply to speak, he typed one short line. "I never saw you as weak, only as brave until the very end." Clara broke down in tears. He looked at her for a long time, as if trying to imprint the image of this woman onto the deepest part of memory, the place even death could never reach. Then, with the last bit of strength he had, William gave her fingers the faintest squeeze. A silent thank you, a quiet promise. Clara rested her forehead against his hand, her tears soaking into the pillow. That was the last afternoon William opened his eyes. 3 days later, he passed in deep sleep. No pain, no machines, no patient labels, only the soft light falling across his peaceful face, and a violin still standing quietly in the corner of the room, as if waiting for one last song that never came